Can we tell if this is working or not? Can we make it romantic in here and dim the lights a tiny bit?
Little berry white.
Yeah. So we can really get talking about rattlesnakes. So I am Rachel Westbrook, and I'm going to talk about the husbandry and propagation of Montane rattlesnakes. But before I get into that, I'm just going to talk about my basic experience with venomous reptiles and reptiles in general. So at Oregon State University, in the same tiny, tiny town, is Brad's World Reptiles. And if any of you have been to a state fair in California, Alaska, Washington, Oregon, Utah, or Idaho, you have seen his setups. He has giant snakes and gators and a bunch of different birds. But this is my first talk and program that I ever did. It was with the Burmese python. And the macaw up there, her name is Margarita. And I actually try to keep up with Brad and talk to him about things regularly whenever we see each other at shows. And he told me that the parrot, 15 years later, on my shoulder is Margarita's baby, which is so special. And then there's my husband, and then Brad over to the right. And then I moved on to the Kentucky Reptile Zoo. If any of you are familiar, it is one of the largest venom extraction facilities in the United States. They have a couple thousand venomous snakes there, and the owner does extractions every single day. So whether, maybe not during blizzard season, but other than that, every single day he's out there, and they're open to the public, which is really neat. I started off as an intern there, so you just kind of go and clean up sheds and poop for a couple months. And at the end of that, I was offered a position as one of the keepers there. This is just a collection of photos that I have. I'm holding a cottonmouth, one of my favorite snakes. And sometimes we would get confiscations every year of alligators. And that's just one of the babies that needed extra care. So some of the keepers get to take the animals home just to give them a little bit extra attention. These snakes are super neat. They're soft-scaled vipers. If you guys are not familiar, they are so small that they actually eat insects, so you can feed them crickets when they're babies. And they don't hiss or make noise naturally with a rattle, so they use their keeled scales to rub up against each other, and it makes a hissing noise, which is super neat. And where do you put thousands of venomous snakes? In a whole lot of tubs. So there's 12 buildings there, and 3 are open to the public. So if you go there, you can actually go inside and see some of these areas. And I was the smallest person there, so whenever they needed a new rack hooked up or heat ran or anything like that, I would always wiggle into the tiny spaces. And if you look in this photo, that window right there is open to the outside. So the cages are moved, and then the public can watch the extraction from that table right there. So you get up close and personal with some of the venomous snakes that you don't normally get to see that closely. So I don't know if you guys know how yellow venom is, but it is very yellow. Some snakes, it's less yellow. Mambas have a very pale yellow venom, but it's very, very sticky. It's very adhesive. That's why sucking venom out of a wound doesn't work. It's kind of like a Band-Aid, so it's so sticky that you really can't do anything other than treat the wound. But this is the owner, Jim Harrison, and there's just a couple videos. He sometimes will tube the snake, like up in the upper left-hand corner. That is a neotropical rattlesnake, and if they're not tubed, if they're just grabbed, like this mamba here, they actually flail around so much they'll break their own back to try to get away. It's crazy. And then there's always a little vial set up, a little funnel, and the venom is gently massaged from their glands and then put into a little tube. And then we label everything with a code that is specific to each individual animal in the entire property. No animal has the same code. And then there's just a picture of a huge king cobra and a black mamba. And after that, I moved to the Fort Worth Zoo in the Museum of Living Arts building. It was very new when I came in. It was only about a year old. But one of the coolest animals I got to work with there were the gharials. And there was a giant 13-foot male and a couple ladies. And they were in a 90,000-gallon setup. So there are Batagur turtles up there in the corner. They had tilapia, tons of fish. So it was just like what you would see if you went to visit gharials. And we would have to go out every morning in the boat, and the big male would come up underneath the boat and vibrate, and the whole boat would kind of shake. And he was very nice. He didn't ever try to bite the fish or bite us, but he just let us know that he was still in there. They were all target trained, which is really neat. So twice a day we would come out, and we had 2 cones set up, and the boy knew to get over by one cone and the girls knew to line up by the other cone, and we would just take the fish and feed them with tongs, and they were very well behaved. And after that, I went to the Chiricahua Desert Museum, where I started working with rattlesnakes really heavily, especially the montane species. And these are just some of the other things that I thought were interesting. The snake sheds up there are timber rattlesnake sheds. So the one on the left is a normal timber rattlesnake. The one in the middle is a het albino. And then the one on the right is an albino. So you can see they have the same pattern, but it's just a variation of different shades. And that photo is a picture of newborn baby bobcat kittens. There was a mama that used to leave her babies on the wall, and she would take them away at night, but during the day when she was out hunting or doing mom bobcat things, she would leave them there. And we never messed with them, but it was always fun to see them. So what is a montane rattlesnake? They're mountain rattlesnakes, basically. They live up in higher elevations. There's numerous different species, and they live throughout southern Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and then down into Mexico and Central America. They live up very high, so about 3,500 feet to 11,000 feet above sea level, which is insane. And I know that close to where I used to live in Arizona, in the Chiricahua Mountains, you find the twin-spotted rattlesnakes, which I have a photo of in the next slide. And they live up at 11,000 feet, and you'll go up hiking when there's snow on the ground. And if there is sun and a rock that has no snow, those snakes will be out basking with snow on the ground, which is incredible. Their venom mostly is hemotoxic. You're finding new things out about venom constantly. So most of them are hemotoxic, and they're pretty small for snakes in general. Most of them are they're under 2 feet. So there's some that are a little bit bigger, but all of them are relatively small, and the babies are just tiny little noodles. So the husbandry is here. It's again, a lot of tubs. The photo on the left is what the adult pairs of montane rattlesnakes live in. So this is basically a setup shot. So there's information on little post-its on the right, if the snake shed, if the snake had some sort of issue. There's always a postcard on the left telling you how many snakes are in the cage, because especially with cages like this, there's a lip on it. So if you don't know how many snakes are in there, it's a surprise. And so you should always count your snakes. And the postcards that are up behind that are basic information about the snake, when they ate, when the cage was cleaned, what they ate. There's a basking light you can see in the middle, and there's always natural rocks there. The basking light is about 90 degrees, and the room is kept at about 70 to 75. So it's a pretty cold room, but they live in the mountains, so that's pretty normal. The basking light should warm up the entire rock structure and hide for hours after the light goes off. So it's to simulate what you would find in their natural environment. So if they want to stay warmer for a little bit longer, they can go underneath the little rock formation and stay warmer, or there's a cooler hide off to the left. And there's also holes underneath the water bowl if they want to get a little bit damp too. This is just another room. It's just tons of racks. Everything that was venomous is always labeled red for caution. So having 1,000 snakes, not all of them being venomous, you really have to be careful about what drawers you're opening. So there's always tools hanging on the wall, easy to get to. Everything is well labeled. And the little boxes right there are actually baby boxes. So there's some snakes that only have 3 babies and some snakes that have 13 babies. And so you never know how many babies are going to pop out in one day. So there's a whole room just full of little baby shoe boxes with tiny snakes in them. The breeding happens during the monsoon season or during the wet season, naturally. So it happens in August, September, and October in nature. So we would always mist. You keep the temps up a little bit warmer then, but making sure that the humidity is high, gets the snakes all jazzed up. And then after they ovulate, breeding takes about 60 days before the babies are born. So you can see up in the upper left-hand corner that Marulus is very, very fast. She was days away from popping out babies. And I think she had 10 babies. And the babies are just the cutest things ever. So you can see they're actually locked up here. And the female will literally drag the male around. If you've never seen rattlesnakes mating, the female just does whatever she wants. She just lives her normal life and the male just gets dragged along with her. And they can stay locked up for 2 seconds. They could stay locked up for a couple minutes. But after that, then they go their separate ways. Baby season is always very exciting. They're ovoviviparous, so they have eggs held inside of them, and then the eggs hatch inside, and then babies are born. So the middle photo right there is actually what the babies look like as soon as they hatch out. The light pink stuff that you can see in there is their yolk. So all snakes have belly buttons. They're born connected to a little yolk sac. And once they shed out of their egg, which is just a very thin, tissue paper thin membrane, they come out, they take their first breath, and then they pull away from the yolk sac, and then their little belly button heals up. And you can see belly buttons even on really old snakes, which is kind of neat. You can say they stay with their mom kind of in big piles. And what I learned at the Kentucky Reptile Zoo is that if you leave babies with the parents, they are way more likely to thrive after they make their first shed. They'll eat more readily. They just do better. And so we try to always leave the babies with the parents as long as possible. And then as soon as the first one starts to shed, you can pull all of them. And you can see this one is just starting to shed. So he's halfway out of his shed. And that baby is probably 4 inches long. So just the tiniest little thing you've ever seen. The unfertilized eggs are called slugs. And they're also pushed out with the live babies. Sometimes you have 0 slugs. Sometimes you have all slugs, unfortunately. But in a perfect world, there would be no slugs. This is really interesting. It's the only time I have seen Montane rattlesnakes do this, but she had a bunch of babies. The photo from before with the little yolk sacs, that's actually her litter. And she is nosing around her baby. That baby was stillborn, so it was completely formed, connected to the yolk sac. It made it out of its membrane, but it just wasn't, it didn't do well. It was dead. And she ate it. So it's very common for snakes to eat the slugs to conserve those nutrients. They put a lot of energy into making those babies, even the unfertilized eggs, making those slugs. So it's common for them to eat the slugs, but I hadn't seen one eat a baby before. And I thought it was so interesting. And she ate both of her dead babies. So you wonder how you feed a little snake that's only a couple inches long that doesn't want to eat. And you don't want to ever touch them with your fingers. You know, any chance of you getting bit, you want to avoid. So this feeding, it's called sponge feeding. It's kind of a weird technique, but it's pretty basic and it gets the job done. It takes a really long time and a little patience, but they do really well with this process. So this teeny tiny baby, this is a twin spot rattlesnake. They live up at the highest elevation at the 11,000 feet. And this baby is so small, you can see he's on a squishy board or a squishy pad. So it's not real firm. And you just really literally use a painting sponge and you pin down their head ever so gently. And what I'm feeding them in this third picture is one leg of a pinky mouse. So it's the tiniest thing, if you can imagine how little that snake's head is. And you just kind of wiggle it and wiggle it. And once you get it into their mouth, if you let them go, you can see his little mouth is open because he's actually swallowing that food. So you let them work its way down, and you have to do that every 5 days with all of the snakes that don't eat. And it's easiest if you can find really small lizards. That's naturally what they would eat in the wild. But if you don't have a breeding project of little geckos or little lizards, and you can't find anybody that has them, this is the best bet. And it has a lot more nutrients too. It has more fats, which helps the babies grow up quickly. So for feeding snakes in general, rattlesnakes, you have to make the food accordingly for their size. You always look at the largest part of the body of the rattlesnake, and that's how big the food item should be. So some snakes don't eat every 5 days like those babies do. Most snakes eat once a week, but the bigger the snake, the less often they need to feed, and the bigger meal they eat. So if you're feeding a huge Western diamondback a little rabbit, they need to eat once a month. They don't need to eat once a week because they're not using all of that energy looking for food, looking for a mate. You're giving them all of those things in captivity. So you want to try to keep them slimmer because then they can live longer. You always want to separate them during feedings. Snakes will eat each other. It is not very common, but I have seen it happen a few times. And they smell the food and they start in like Lady and the Tramp, and then they just don't stop. Not romantic. We try to always feed frozen thawed. It is really dangerous to feed live rodents to snakes. I have heard stories of teachers leaving a rat in with a ball python over the weekend, and then they come back and the mouse or rat has actually eaten the eyes or face off of the snake, and because they're hungry. And if the snake isn't hungry, they don't realize that they should kill the food. So they just move to the other side of the cage. But I think that the mice have figured out that there's a little moving snack in there. And if you can get them to bite it, they will eat it the majority of the time. So if you have this room temperature rodent that is not alive, it's not really moving. But if you can tease the snake and get them to envenomate it and make it dance along and cause a trail for them to follow, there's a way higher percentage chance that they will actually eat the food. So if there's a chance that they can bite it, pretend that it's alive in the cage, they'll follow the trail and then eat it. And this is just fun stuff. So the picture on the left, I don't know if you are familiar with kissing bugs, but bugs are a problem everywhere, no matter what. This facility was in the desert, so kissing bugs were an issue in people's homes. And this was one that I actually found in a cage, and I had not found another one in the cage, but I just couldn't believe that there was a kissing bug actually feeding off of a snake. So they will bite an animal and then drink its blood, kind of like a mosquito. It was unbelievable to me that one of them snuck in through all of the doors and all of the rooms and then made its way into this cage. And that up above, that drop right there, is a drop of venom, and it's on the lip of a drawer. That's why you always use hooks to open drawers. And that's from a copperhead. So when you open the drawer, The copperhead would bite whatever you put towards it. It would bite food, hook, hand, and sometimes the drawer itself. And so it would leave sometimes so much venom that it would be dripping onto the floor. My favorite photos are in the middle. And if any of you keep snakes, you totally understand why. Because when they shed, they poop in the shed sometimes, and then you don't have a mess to clean up, and it is the best. The easiest cleanup ever. And the photo on the right, if you can see up top, it's a little blurry, and then there's a fang. And so that snake, it's a black-tailed rattlesnake, it actually struck at me as I was passing by its cage, and it left venom streaks and a loose fang on the glass that was just stuck there. And I thought it was so cool. Of course, I had to take a photo. And you want to be really careful when cleaning things like that up. You always use bleach because bleach denatures the protein of the venom. And you don't want to stab yourself with a fang that came straight out of a snake's mouth, because obviously it does have a ton of venom still inside of it. So you got to be really careful about that. And I think that's it.